Hello, everyone. My name is Wanda Whitaker. I'm with Anchored in Spirit, and welcome to another conversation with friends around the issue of race post George Floyd. These conversations are part of the Racial Reconciliation Project and the Free Yourself First, a journey of healing and action for white people. Online workshops. The series raises funds for Village Connect, a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in San Leandro, California, that provides sustainable and transformative services for the mostly Black and Brown communities. They take place on Saturday, August 8th, 15th, and 22nd from 3 o'clock until 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. For more information and to register for the series, please contact or go to www.village-connect.org. Today, I'm very, very excited to have my good friend, mentor, and sage, Chip Conley, join the conversation. Chip is a New York Times best-selling author and boutique hotel entrepreneur who helped Airbnb's founders turn their fast-growing tech startup into a global hospitality brand. Chip is also the founder of the Martin Elder Academy, where a new roadmap for midlife is offered at a beautiful oceanfront campus in Mexico. More like a resort, it is one of the most exquisite places you could ever hold a resort or retreat, but of course, in Chip Conley hospitality style. So Chip, how are you?
Wanda, I love you. It's great. It's great to be here with you. You look great.
Thank you.
You need to have your own show on, CNN, I think.
You're so great.
Yeah.
That's what I love about you. You always inspire people even more and more and more. But before we get started on the issues of race, I just want you to tell us a little bit more about the Martin Elder Academy.
Sure. So back in the Great Recession, I had a handful of friends all in midlife commit suicide. And I actually was thinking about it myself, to be quite frank. My company was in a terrible place. Wanda knows exactly what was going on with me back then. I had just about everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Thankfully, I didn't do anything to myself. I was able to sell my company, Joie de Vivre, boutique hotel company. It's now a Hyatt brand. I went to work with Airbnb. I realized within the first week, like, oh my God, I'm twice the age of the average employee here. And I was supposed to be the wise elder, but I felt like, the dumb beginner's mind much of the time. And what it made me help to see that more and more people in midlife are feeling irrelevant. We're going to live longer, power's moving younger, and the world is changing faster. And those three variables have a lot of people bewildered in midlife. And later. And so I decided to create the world's first midlife wisdom school called the Modern Elder Academy, also known as MEA. And we've been open for 2.5 years now. And Wanda's been in 2 different cohorts. We've had 50 different cohorts from 24 countries, 750 people. And yeah, it's been quite an experience to help people. And we're socioeconomically diverse. 25% of our alums are people of color, and 62% of our people have been on some form of scholarship we've given them. What that's helped us to do is create the environment where wisdom is not taught, it's shared. And how do you have a robust collection of 15 to 20 people in a cohort sharing their wisdom with each other, but actually tapping into that wisdom as well?
So Chip, we met about 30 years ago. And when I tell people that, they always say, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "No."
True.
And you owned and you remodeled this iconic boutique hotel called the Phoenix Inn in San Francisco.
It was a pay-by-the-hour motel. Let's start with that. It did become sort of a boutique motel hotel, but yes.
But this was a place where you could find the most famous rock and roll bands, and you could see icons that included Robert Kennedy Jr. and Canoe Reeves just sitting at the pool. And you threw some great parties as well. But although I know a lot about your life, I would love for you to share some of your experiences and give some words of wisdom around race and reconciliation. So I'm going to ask you some questions. And one of
Sure.
the first questions I'm going to ask you is, when did you first become aware that you were white? Is part one. And part two, when and what was your first experience with Black people?
So when did I first realize I had the affliction of being white? Not an affliction. You know what? I didn't, just like so many white people in a dominant white American culture, I didn't know much other than white when I was young. I went to a church with my parents that was predominantly white. I lived in a neighborhood that was predominantly white. I went to elementary school, kindergarten, elementary school in a predominantly white area. So it wasn't until I was, gosh, seventh grade, which would be about age 12, that I started to realize that there was a much bigger world out there. I think part of it started maybe when we had some foreign exchange students in my elementary school. They were mostly from Latin or Asian countries, so not so much from with the African diaspora. And then I went to junior high school, and my progression from elementary school, where it was just like 92% white, to junior high school, which was about 70% white, was a very interesting one because I was playing basketball, and all of a sudden, guess what? The white guy who can't jump, who was good in elementary school in basketball and junior high school, whoa, but I loved it. I just loved my junior high school friends who came from a different culture. I realized how culturally curious I was. And that was really when I started to build a relationship with my African-American friends. And then in high school, I went from 92% to 70%. My high school was 37% white. So I was like, wow, what's it like to be the other? I actually think we all need to BTO, be the other, at times in our lives where especially those people who are in the sort of most powerful and, predominant demographic. And that's when I really built some of my deepest relationships with Black people. And so I would just say that was my progression. I'd say it made me more culturally curious. I loved soul food in high school. I loved all kinds of music from the Black culture. I'm just going to be honest here. So for people who don't know it, I am a gay man, but the first person I was ever sexual with was a Black girl named Brenda Sanders. And I'm sorry that I'm outing her here. She came on to me in our French class for a whole year, and I finally said, "Okay, my grandparents are gone. We're going over to my grandparents," and we were both 15. And so that was terrible, but I just said that, but it's true. I think what it means is that there was this element in me that felt comfortable with Black people. And I think what it was about, and I'll just finish with this, is that in the dominant culture that I was used to, I felt like I had to fit in. I was this white guy. I was this creative, in the closet, super athlete, very focused on accomplishment in school, student body president of my high school that was predominantly non-white. But I didn't feel like I could be myself. When I was hanging out with my Black friends, especially my Black girlfriends, the Black girlfriends gave me the ability to just be more fun, be a clown, dance, be creative, be occasionally just a bit of a joker. And when I was hanging out with my white friends, I actually felt I had to sort of be like them. But when I actually could be with people who were different than me culturally, I actually felt like I just could be myself. I didn't have to be my demographic.
It's very important for people who don't know. You're a great basketball player, so who said white boys can't jump? Because you can jump and do a whole lot of other things with that basketball, and you're a great dancer as well.
Thank you.
So I just want to mention that because I've enjoyed some of our dancing together, yes. And actually went on a court with you one time. I thought I could beat you, and you taught me some lessons about that. And that's why I'm never going on a court with you again. Anyway.
Did you play at University of Maryland?
Well, I tried out for the University of Maryland Terrapins
Yeah.
women's team, and stayed there for a little while, but I just couldn't take the practices. It was just
Yeah.
too much running up and down Coldfield House, those stairs. It
Hmm.
was just too much for me.
Girlfriend
And
just wanted to have fun with her college years.
yes, I had a lot of fun too. But hurt other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if this is true, what do you feel is hurting some white people to want to hurt Black people?
Um, there are some white people who want to hurt Black people, and there's some white people, and I actually think it's the majority, who have no clue they're hurting white people or Black people or other
Hmm.
people. They're so obsessed with their own world, they have no idea what effect they're having on someone else's world. So, what are the qualities that create that situation? Well, number one is self-obsession, and that often is fear. The fear of, being left behind, the fear of not being good enough,
That's true.
the fear of people different than you, the fear of danger, and that stranger equals danger. So, if you're different than me, you're danger. So I think that's part of it. I think if you look at what's going on right now in the United States, which is just tragic, I mean, just so tragic. I think that there's a pent up, I think what Trump tried to tap into, and I'm not going to be very political here, but I will just say this. I think what he tried to tap into was this resentment. And there's a resentment that's deep, and it's not just toward Black people. It's a resentment toward elites. It's a resentment toward a shifting from an industrial an economy to a tech economy. It's a resentment toward people who have seemed to know how to make the system work, and the system works for them. So Black people have gotten caught up in this, partly because there's a perception by some white people that things like affirmative action and other programs that have helped Barack Obama get elected president, as if affirmative action got him elected president. I'm like, right. That somehow these programs have allowed people of color, often, or people who've been marginalized, to have better opportunities. And in many ways, what this comes down to is people, there is a new group of people in the US who feel marginalized, and many of them are white people. And that may be true. They may have been marginalized by an economic system that has screwed them over. And yet they often tend to vote for the politicians who are sort of backing that system. And I'm not saying this because I'm a socialist or anything. I'm not. I'm a card-carrying capitalist, but I'm a capitalist. I'm a karmic capitalist. I believe that what goes around comes around. So I think that's part of what's happening. And I think there's a lot of hurt people right now because of external circumstances that are beyond color.
Yeah, and sometimes what they call white privilege in some cases, they don't realize that they have that privilege simply
Yeah.
because, they're white men, for example, who have the luxury of not being stopped by the police.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Well, this
while
is a funny.
turning on the wrong turn signal.
There's a Dave Chappelle. So Dave Chappelle used to stay at the Phoenix. So Dave Chappelle, for those who don't know him, the famous African American comedian, sort of a wacky guy. He's a bit off. He has a very famous bit he's done on stage many times about him and his friend Chip, and it comes based upon my experience with him. We never did what he said, but I had experiences with him. And the story basically is this: he and his friend Chip go into the center of San Francisco, and basically the Tenderloin, and they're doing drugs, or they're looking for drugs, and Chip is clueless about having any fear about the police. Chip has no idea that the police could actually be danger. Whereas Dave Chappelle's like, dude, this is serious. And so Chip just goes, and so Dave Chappelle and I never had that experience, but we certainly had conversations because he was a guest in my hotel, that first hotel, that funky motel. many, many times. That story is an indicative story. That white privilege that the guy Chip in Dave Chappelle's comic skit has a white privilege that he doesn't even know he has.
That's right, because sometimes you may not have eaten caviar or sat in first class.
No.
So, right. So that is a luxury, you know, that some people have that other people don't. And sometimes you have to acknowledge that and recognize that. But privilege can go across the board. I know I've experienced privilege, a
Mm-hmm.
privilege of being a Black American traveling,
Mm-hmm.
the privilege of when I was in high school, junior high school, elementary school, just being in the honor society and being able to go to our classes, being able to go to the gym first or go to the auditorium first, go to the cafeteria first, and all the other kids would be around and envying us. There
You've had
are privileges that we
There are
have.
privileges. You've had the privilege, as is true of many um, communities of color, families of color, of having a lineage and a family that really prizes their roots, which is actually often less the case for white people. Um, you know, whether it's the Asian culture and how you know, or Latinx culture, or the African American culture, uh, Native American culture, even there's a real sense of solidarity in family, which in some ways the dominant white culture in the U.S. has been missing.
Right. And of course, African Americans are deeply steeped in culture, where there is music, religion,
Mm-hmm.
song, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring up a good point when you talk about the family.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very prominent structure, although it's breaking down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to be cognizant of that. But it has given us some privileges that other people may not see it as
Mm-hmm.
rich privileges, but at the end of the day, underneath all of that, it is very, very rich.
Mm.
So, as a former CEO and business owner, have there been instances when racism has been detrimental to your brand? And if so, what happened and how did you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. We had 52 boutique hotels, and we're the largest hotelier, independent hotelier in Northern California. So, did we have instances? Yes. Very, none that I can even think of internally within the employee pool. But did we have an embarrassing situation that I think you'll remember this one. A Kenyan professor came to San Francisco and he was jet lagged. He came to actually give a speech and to do some scholarly work in San Francisco. He was dressed somewhat disheveled and a little bit confused because of the jet lag. And at one of our hotels, this particular hotel, not all of our hotels are luxuries, most of them are not, but this hotel is sort of an upscale luxury hotel, and he was sitting in an area where there was a party that was going to go on, and they were trying to get people out of the area, but they were just trying to they were doing it ungraciously, and he was frankly the only person who was in that area at that time, and so they just said they didn't assume that he was a guest in the hotel, which he was. They didn't assume he was like, you know, some well-known scholar from Kenya. They thought he was a homeless guy. And so from that led to a lot of, a bunch of stuff. We dealt with it really well and then I just thought of another one with the Latifa. We have a business called Kabuki Springs and Spa, and Latifa Simon, who's now on the BART board, she was very involved with this young women Center for Women's Development, and it was predominantly um, African American younger women, often who had been involved in drugs or prostitution, and this was a way for them to actually build esteem. Well, we had given them some free passes to go. Oh, actually, I don't remember the exact story. I'm not going to try to recite the story because I might get it wrong. What happened is, I don't know if they got. I think that I don't know if they got free passes to go and then weren't treated well, or they were actually going there and weren't treated well, and we gave them free passes. Either way, what I know is it was the way I got to know Latifah Simon, and who I love and have a close friendship with, because I was, what happened was it, this is what happens sometimes. It felt like racism. And I think what our people at the front desk at Kabuki were worried about is how much talking was going on. And so you get a bunch of predominantly, teenage girls of color together to go into what's supposed to be sort of a solemn space for people to do the bathing and all of that. And so someone, a supervisor, sort of gave them the impression that they were just not wanted there. Didn't say they had to go, but just didn't treat them well. And so I think the thing to learn from both of these situations is there were people on my team and people in my world who sort of, their initial reaction is to defend and sort of don't acknowledge anything and defend. And mine is, I have the opposite of perspective, which is like, innocent until proven guilty. What happened here clearly is our fault. We did something wrong here. And unless we can prove that we didn't do something wrong here, I believe we did something wrong here. Now that's a hard thing for our team to swallow, meaning the employees to swallow, if it feels like we're doing this every week. But if we're doing it every week, something's wrong with our culture. Or we become a real pawn for people to come and just try to like rip us off for one thing or another. But that's not the way the world works. And the way the world works is mistakes are made. And if you don't own up to your mistakes as an organization, people actually try to put the mistakes under the rug. And you wonder as the CEO of a big company, why the culture of your company sucks and all kinds of crap is happening that is embarrassing. And so to be able to own it and then apologize for it and then say, here's what we're going to do about it foundationally, it's sort of, in many ways, my experience at Airbnb was that, the Airbnb platform was being used by, there are hosts in the Airbnb platform. Airbnb is so big that it's basically just a mirror for the world. Right. And so the mirror for the world means that there were actually people out there as hosts who didn't want Black people to actually stay with them. And so we were called out on it, not because Airbnb was racist, but because our hosts, in certain cases, a very small percentage, let's be honest, were racist or homophobic or you name it. And so, or in some cases, it was like a woman host who didn't want a man staying in her home. That's a tougher one. It's like, okay, how do you deal with that? But if it's racist, it's really easy to deal with. And we basically take the host off the platform and then we had the NAACP and other specialists come in and say, how could we change our platform to make it more race blind, more, so I've seen it a lot. And the thing that's sad is how embedded it is in society based on what we're seeing right now.
Well, I kind of look at things from a spiritual perspective, and you're right. A lot of times we just simply won't take responsibility for our actions. But it's a great thing that you met Latifah Simon, because Latifah Simon became a very prominent person in San Francisco. She's, and actually, it gave me a chance to meet her as well, and actually do some great things for the organization. It was the Center for Young Women's Development, and put on a great event for them at the Women's Center in San Francisco, but it was because of you. And I actually had a chance to talk with her and tell her about you and the type of person that you were. And so I want to thank you for that. But this is how things work out. Sometimes our challenges are our gifts, and we're supposed to meet people. These synchronicities happen like that, and it's how we respond to them that can determine how they turn out.
Yep. Right.
And they can also keep us on our path of growing and evolving. And so there's a quote in your book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of the Modern Elder, and you reference psychologist Viktor Frankl. Is that correct?
Yep, exactly.
And I think it's between stimulus and response, there is a space, right? And in that space is your power to choose your response. In your response lies your growth and your freedom. And how does that have something to do with having a growth mindset, right? And play a role in racial reconciliation?
Mhm. Well, you said a lot there. I would just say that the Viktor Frankl quote is my favorite 3 sentences in the world. And it really just says, how do we move out of reaction into response? And most of us in life are reactive. And it's not healthy for us or others. And to be responsive means that, and is to take responsibility. And reconciliation is a form of response.
Mm-hmm.
Reconciliation doesn't happen often in a reaction. It happens in a response. Growth mindset comes from a woman named Carol Dweck, who is a Stanford professor in psychology. And she was able to show that you could have one of two kinds of mindsets, a fixed or a growth mindset. It's sort of on a spectrum. So it's not like either or, it's more of a dimmer. And so growth mindset, a fixed mindset is when you believe that you're trying to prove yourself, and to be successful is to win. And most of us live that life. Like I want to prove myself. I want to win. But to have a growth mindset means that you're actually not focused on proving yourself. You're focused on improving yourself. And winning, success is not winning, success is learning. And when you can move to the place that your life purpose is to improve yourself in all ways, and to not necessarily win, but to learn, including when the learning is painful. Whether the learning is having lost something, or the learning is, in the examples I've used here, being embarrassed that your company or yourself made a mistake. To learn that is to metabolize it, digest it, metabolize it, and make you better as a result of that. So that's really been my life's work. It's not easy, and it does at times require, it requires a lot of humility for sure. It also at times means you're going to be a bit of a piñata, to use a nice Mexican. I don't know if piñata is just a Mexican thing or it's a Spanish thing, but I'll just say the Spanish word, Mexican culture, piñata means you get beaten up a lot. And that's where you need friends. And this is where you've been a helpful friend at times, Wanda, because when I was a kid, there was a game called Pin the Tail on the Donkey.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, I have seen occasionally situations where people are playing pin the tail on the honky. And the tail is not a tail like coming out of your backside. It is a T-A-L-E. It's the tale of the story of what you think that white person did. And sometimes that pin the tail on the honky is accurate and it's deserved. And sometimes it's not. And when it's not, it's a very difficult situation, especially if you're somebody who has prided yourself on trying to be progressively minded and supportive in all kinds of ways. And what I appreciate is that that's when we need not just reaction from the Black community and from the progressive community. We need response. We need not, because what reaction leads to is not trying to understand the tale, T-A-L-E. And I think understanding the tale is important. And that's the tale of two cities we have in the United States today is the tale of two political parties that are they have an enormous divide between them. And yet they have some commonality. And the tale of different races and ethnographies and cultures, we have a lot in common. But it takes empathy to understand the other person's tale. And that's why Be the Other, BTO, so important.
And I think a lot of that too is you're learning. Again, I'm going to stress that because I know that when you come from a different perspective, when you come from your core self, right? And your core beliefs and your core values, and you look in terms of, okay, I was born white or I was born Black, and I came into the society the way it is, the way it's structured.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what is my purpose, right? What is my purpose for being born Black or being born white?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have all of these challenges, and perhaps you as a white person, yeah, you go through traumas. Everybody goes through traumas, but you're born into a society that where the socialization is already structured in a way that puts you in a certain place already. All right. Now
Mm-hmm.
you're born as a Black person, and I believe we've been many, many different races, and I know I've been with you in a past life
Yes,
somewhere.
yes, yes.
Right. And I come in as a Black person, and I have all of these traumas and all of this historical baggage that's suppressing and oppressing me, along with the society whole as a whole is suppressing me. But perhaps as a white person who is so-called privileged, you're coming in to learn compassion. Perhaps you're coming in to learn being able to have or express the core values that are most important to you. And those are where the commonalities are, right? As a Black person, perhaps I'm learning self-love. Perhaps I'm learning self-empowerment. Perhaps I'm learning how to speak up for myself. So there's a lot of learning going on, and we don't even realize it because we're thinking we're thinking about it from a different perspective.
That's so beautiful. It sort of says what's your sacred contract coming into this lifetime, and there's a guy named Stephen Forrest who's a very famous evolutionary astrologer who believes that the reason astrology is meant for you to understand how you're supposed to evolve your consciousness in this lifetime, and I think that when you can actually have some comfort that actually each of us has a different contract, a different consciousness we're evolving, and it helps you to understand, okay, now I can look at this a little differently and understand instead of being cursed, this is actually the blessing. And I'm supposed to learn something from it. But yeah, that was very beautiful, Wanda. Thank you.
You're welcome. But of course, we always have these kind of conversations, Chip,
Mm-hmm.
offline anyway. So I'm going to ask you another question, and that is, what do you think white people should do to acknowledge and alleviate racial disparities that exist between Black and white Americans?
So, it's interesting. I think all white people pre George Floyd went to the same university. Uh, the university was called Where Were You? Where, meaning post George Floyd, yes, everybody got up in arms and said, "Oh, we got to do this, we got to do that." Like, where were you pre George Floyd? Where were you pre Trayvon Martin? Where were you pre? I mean, the truth is that if wisdom is about pattern recognition, how come white people haven't seen the pattern until George Floyd? So what I would say is this, is number one, look at your personal practices and rituals. I loved it when you said rituals before and you were talking about rich. It's like rich with rituals. Well, Black community is rich with rituals. Rich with rituals. That's beautiful. What if rituals, the word rituals should start R-I-C-H, rituals.
Right. Rituals. I like
So,
that.
I think the number one starting point is how do I practice an alternative way of seeing the world? How can I be the other? What am I doing to actually build friendships, deep friendships within communities that I'm not familiar with, or that I'm not part of historically? So you start with that because that's something you can control. Then you move beyond that and you say, in my community, whether that community is my church, whether that community is my alumni program from college, that just seems to have forgotten about the Black people who went to our college because they aren't very well connected to the white people in our college, and they don't come to the reunion. So how do we take the school system? How do we take the workplace and ask questions that allow us to not just add to diversity, because what that can actually potentially mean in certain circumstances is tokenism. Um, but actually move beyond diversity to inclusion and equity, which really speaks to the inclusion piece of it. Speaks to, we want to hear the diverse voices, maybe even more than the dominant voices, because frankly, it's going to help us to hear and see something we might not have seen as the dominant group. Because sociology tells us there's a groupthink that happens, and whichever group has the dominant voice, groupthink happens, because the people who are the lesser voices, minority voices, in whatever form of minority they are, don't have it's harder to actually stand up for that voice. So that means inclusion is like, how do we bring those voices in? And then the equity piece speaks to the reconciliation piece, which is like, okay, what's fair here given the history? And this is a very important question, and a hard one, because reparations is one way to have fairness. And then if you talk to somebody who's from a middle class, working class white family that doesn't have a lot of experience with the, say, African American society and culture, they look at like, wait, we've had this affirmative action, we've had all of these things since the 1960s or 70s. We've already had reparations. And I've had people say that to me. I don't know what the right solution is. And I actually think it's a really vexing challenge. But I think that there needs to be a solution, because when one group of people feels like the reparations already happened, and another group of people thinks like, what are you talking about? Look at George Floyd. And I can make a very long list, including the fact that Wanda will go into a store and have somebody on occasion follow her around the store because she's worried that she's going to shoplift. I don't have that problem.
No, you don't.
So.
And that goes back to, okay, I'm going to say, we never got our 40 acres and a mule, by the way.
Yeah, maybe that
right?
Yeah.
And when you talk in terms of reparations, we never got any money like a whole lot of other groups did. That didn't come to us.
Well, who are the groups that did? Who are the groups that got the reparations in the United States, let's say?
Well, I'll say that Jewish people got the reparations.
How did they get the reparations?
And when I say that.
In the U.S.? They got Israel.
That's right. That's the reparations. That's where most Black people will come from. As I talk to more African Americans, this is what they say. They say Israel is still getting reparations because there's the smallest country in the world that gets the most money from the United States.
Yeah. No,
so that's how they talk when I ask these questions. That's their response.
It's a worthy response, although the fact that it's a global response as opposed to an American response is one complicating element of this, because Israel was, there's a lot. I love this subject. I think it's a really provocative subject, and one that there's not an easy answer to, but I actually think we're going to get better at this because we just don't have a history of talking about it.
And quite frankly, I believe the Jewish people deserved it. I mean, look what happened to them. So we've got to find a way to make up for these transgressions some kind of way. But I believe that we can come to a compromise if we just get together. That's why I like the racial reconciliation of the apartheid in South Africa.
Yes.
They did it in such a way, but I'm just saying, can we do something like that in America? Without somebody being shot and killed.
I think there's the issue of guns, the issue of knowing we don't have a ton more time. All I can say is I think that is the conversation that needs to happen. And I would love, wouldn't it be interesting if one of the network TV shows just said once a week, we have a diverse group of Americans here in this conference room, 12 of them plucked from different parts, discussing this, different parts of race relations, and reparations being, one part of that. And I just think it would be a fascinating, it would be the better version of reality TV.
And that's why we're having these intensives, because we believe that we all need to heal ourselves as a group, separately and together.
Mhm.
So when we do it separately, we provide the safe space to go deep into some of our hurts and some of our traumas. And I guarantee you that something will come up from a circumstance that happened or situation that happened to you in childhood,
Mhm.
growing up, and perhaps in your teens. Because I can remember, just for example, being growing up in the civil rights move during the civil rights movement. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I remember being in junior high school, or was it high school? It may have been high school, and catching the bus. I had to catch two buses to go home. And these white guys were on the wrong bus. And when they got off the bus, they got beat up very badly.
Mm.
And I said to myself, oh my God, I was so young. I just wish I could do something, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't, I
Mm.
couldn't interfere at all. But I was feeling badly, right? I
Mm.
just wish that they had not even got off the bus,
Right.
right? And so that's a safety concern. But
Mhm.
as I think about it, in future years, other things have happened to me in traumatic situations where I've had to perhaps involve myself and not involve myself. And it made me remember a time when I was little,
Mhm.
and maybe there was some commotion going on in the house, or maybe my father came home drunk, and he wasn't very nice to my mother, and I felt helpless.
Mm.
And so if you go back to that helpless feeling, that is that feeling that is wanting you to change something,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so instead of feeling helpless, it wanted me to feel okay, feel safe, and feel empowered. And so that's what I'm saying. A lot of this is going back to some things that happened to you in childhood, and of course, how you were raised, what was said to you, your core beliefs um, during that time. What are they?
Mhm.
And they get played out, and as you said earlier, in patterns. And
Mhm.
you can see these patterns, and they run throughout your lifetime, whether they're race based or non race based.
Mhm.
They're the same patterns.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things we're going to be going deep in this intensive workshop, August 8th, 15th, and 22nd.
Mm.
And I'm going to ask you one last thing, Chip. I know
Mm.
this conversation could go on and on and on, but what nuggets of wisdom can you share with us that you have not discussed?
Hmm. You know what? I'll just offer one that relates to our Modern Elder Academy program. 150 years ago, aging was aspirational. You wanted to get older. They didn't have birthday parties or birthdays back then. And there was a sense that there was some elder wisdom out there. You learned from your grandpa, grandma. Um, and because a lot of society was built around land, there was a land wisdom. The longer you were around, you could see the patterns of the land in terms of what grows as a farmer. So I would just say my last piece of wisdom is, wisdom is something to be cultivated and harvested at any age. It is not purely the domain of older people. You can be young and be wise as well. And the number one thing I would just offer to people is start to develop your own wisdom book. And this is something I started doing at age 27, I think it was, 28 maybe, when I started my hotel company at age 26. And every weekend I would just put in my wisdom book the 3 to 5 or 7 things I'd learned that week, often things that were painful lessons. And so it wasn't a diary or a journal. It was just a bullet points of like, what did I learn this week? And I have been doing that for 34 years. Not every weekend, but for a while, for during bad times, absolutely every weekend. So I would just say, I would offer to your folks just to know that wisdom is something you can learn. You can cultivate it and harvest it by actually developing it in yourself, and then occasionally listening to someone else who's got some wisdom to offer you.
Well, I want to thank you, Chip. That was wonderful words of wisdom. And I know you're a busy man out in Mexico. Probably taking a walk by the ocean with the dog,
Yeah, baby, you got it.
eating tacos. I love you.
Love you too. That was great. You're really good
So,
at this. You're really good at this. You're really good at this.
okay. Thank you very much. Maybe it's
Mm.
part of my purpose. I don't know, because I know my
Maybe.
purpose finds me. I don't
Yes.
find it. So once again,
I love you.
please, love you too.
All right.
Please, if you are wanting more information about the workshops, Free Yourself First, A Journey of Healing and Action, to visit www.village-connect.org. And we look forward to you joining us in our next conversation.